1.5 to 2 million, or as it's known in the region, 15 to 20 lakh. Just let that number sink in for a second. That staggering figure represents the human cost of the 1947 India-Pakistan partition. We're talking about a massive, chaotic migration and a heartbreaking loss of life that, believe it or not, many prominent leaders of the time actually opposed at first. So how on earth did a united struggle for independence devolve into this?
Welcome to this explainer. Now, this is an incredibly complex and heavy topic. Today, our goal is to objectively trace the 40-year chain reaction of political maneuvers, shifting ideologies, and fateful decisions that ultimately made the partition of India unavoidable. We're going to try to strip away the emotion here and look strictly at the historical dominoes that fell, one by one, leading right up to 1947.
To truly grasp the cause and effect of these massive events, we're going to break this down chronologically into 6 parts: the catalyst from 1905 to 1909, evolving ideologies up to the 1930s, the turning point elections, the failure of the cabinet mission, direct action and violence, and finally, the Mountbatten Plan and its tragic cost.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the catalyst, covering the years 1905 to 1909.
So right at the turn of the century, the British Empire was facing a solidly united Indian resistance, particularly in Bengal. Realizing that the old divide-and-rule playbook was absolutely their best defense, Viceroy Lord Curzon controversially partitioned Bengal in 1905, right along religious lines. And this deliberate split triggered an immediate chain reaction. Within a year, the All India Muslim League was formed in Dhaka, and by 1909, the Morley-Minto reforms were passed, handing them a massive political victory.
Now, that 1909 victory introduced something called separate electorates. This is a voting framework where only members of a specific minority community can vote for candidates of that same community. And rather than just protecting minorities, this concept successfully fractured the populace. It practically guaranteed that different religious groups would actively compete against each other for political power, rather than uniting together against colonial rule. It was a real game changer, and definitely not in a good way.
Moving right along to Section 2, evolving ideologies, spanning from 1916 through the 1930s.
You know, the leaders who were navigating this growing divide experienced massive ideological shifts themselves, and honestly, none were more dramatic than Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Back in 1916, as a member of the Indian National Congress, Jinnah was a firmly secular leader. He was literally dubbed the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. Yet, after spending some time in London, a deeply disillusioned Jinnah returned to India in 1934, completely transformed. He took over the Muslim League and became the primary advocate for the two-nation theory, this core idea that Hindus and Muslims simply could not coexist in one secular state.
But we have to remember, Jinnah wasn't operating in a vacuum here. While the 1916 Lucknow Pact briefly brought parties together, the 1920s saw a huge rise in communalism on all sides, with groups like the Hindu Mahasabha and the RSS gaining real traction. In response to this, by 1930, Muslim League President Muhammad Iqbal officially demanded a separate bloc of Muslim states. And here's a wild fact. It was in 1933 that a Cambridge University student published a pamphlet that actually coined the word Pakistan for the very first time. The stage was well and truly set.
Which brings us to Section 3, the turning point elections of 1937 and 1946.
Because let's be real, ideologies are one thing, but political power is what ultimately draws borders. In the 1937 elections, the Indian National Congress absolutely dominated, even winning in Muslim-reserved areas. But then World War II broke out and Congress leaders resigned en masse in protest against being dragged into the conflict without consultation. The Muslim League took the exact opposite approach and offered the British their support. Strategically, this gave the League crucial time to regroup, spread that two-nation theory, and build unstoppable momentum while Congress leaders were sitting in jail.
And we see that momentum materializing decisively in the 1946 elections. In this seat strictly reserved for Muslims, the Muslim League absolutely swept the board, taking over 90% to secure 425 seats. This was a shocking mandate. It definitively proved to both the British and the Congress that the League was the absolute representative of India's Muslims. Suddenly, their demand for partition was entirely impossible to ignore.
That leads us right into Section 4, the failure of the cabinet mission.
By 1946, you have an exhausted British government desperately trying one last, incredibly complex compromise to avoid splitting the country entirely.
Enter the Cabinet Mission Plan. It explicitly rejected the creation of Pakistan and instead proposed a three-tier system featuring a weak central government and provinces grouped by religious majorities. But there was a fatal flaw, a built-in loophole allowing states to opt out or change groups after 5 years. Congress absolutely hated the mandatory grouping part, and Jinnah, who initially thought that opt-out clause could be a clever stepping stone to a bigger Pakistan, ultimately backed out. Diplomacy completely flatlined. Now we hit Section 5. Direct action and the eruption of violence.
With the cabinet mission totally dead in the water, there was no political roadmap left to follow. So, on August 16, 1946, Jinnah called for Direct Action Day to forcefully press the demand for Pakistan on the streets. What started as a protest rapidly devolved into the Great Calcutta Killings, resulting in massive, horrific casualties. And this just lit a match, triggering a relentless, agonizing year of intense communal violence that spread like wildfire across the entire subcontinent.
The daily, grueling toll of this violence forced the hands of the very leaders who had previously championed a united India. Congress President J.B. Kripalani famously and tragically stated, "Rather than have a battle, we should let them have their Pakistan." It was this agonizing realization Congress leaders pragmatically accepted that the British were leaving no matter what, and partition was literally the only viable path left to stop a full-blown civil war.
And finally, Section 6, the Mountbatten Plan and its tragic cost.
With violence spiraling completely out of control, the British sent in Lord Mountbatten to execute the final handover. Now, Mountbatten's plan was defined by unprecedented, frankly reckless speed. He advanced the Independence Day to August 15, 1947, purely for personal, sentimental reasons. It was the anniversary of him accepting Japan's surrender in World War II. The plan dictated that Punjab and Bengal would be sliced right down the middle based on religious majorities, and it required a total division of all state assets. I mean, they didn't just split military regiments. They were literally dividing office tables, chairs, and typewriters straight down the middle.
But it gets worse. To draw the actual physical borders dividing millions of people, the British appointed a man named Sir Cyril Radcliffe and gave him exactly 3 weeks to finalize the line. 3 weeks! And here is the kicker. Radcliffe had never visited India in his life. He had absolutely zero first-hand knowledge of the local geography or the culture. He just sat there with paper maps and outdated census data, drawing a line that would literally cleave communities, rivers, and people's homes right in half.
And because these borders weren't actually announced until 2 days after independence, millions of people woke up to find themselves on the wrong side of the line overnight. This sparked panicked, desperate migrations and immense violence. So it really makes you wonder, could this tragic loss of millions of lives have been prevented if the British hadn't rushed the drawing of the Radcliffe Line quite so much? It is a profound, devastating reminder of how a hasty colonial exit cemented a legacy of immense human cost and permanent geopolitical scars that are very much still shaping our world today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history that shapes us.